We are going to have a release next week, and then that will be all until the end of January. So this will cover the rest of the year. What's the community call for? It's for you, not for us. It's to give you guys the chance to have more recent updates instead of a couple times a year as it used to be. Please use the chat. We have our team here answering any questions. If you have any specific questions that you want to ask our team, you can also raise your hand. We have a Q&A section at the end of the call. All right, so our 0.24 release, like I said, should be released next week. Hopefully Monday. If not, it'll be sometime in the week. For this release, we don't have too much going on, no big features being released right now. We have optional module names, which is experimental, and Marston will talk on this in a little bit. Pretty printing for union types, just a small change here. We improved the pretty printing layout rule to handle union types surpassing the width limit. Readability is improved when using union types that span one line. So that's a small change for readability. There's a new Bicep JsonRPC command for programmatic consumption in which you can now work with the Bicep command programmatically. If you want a little bit more information, you can ask in chat and we could have the engineers explain a little bit more. Bug fixes, we had a small amount of bug fixes. There were some with user-defined types, one in which exporting a function with user-defined type as an argument would fail. That got fixed. Another with compiled JSON not recognizing discriminator types and BRM generate fails with user-defined types. All of these were fixed in this release, and we'll list all of the bug fixes in the release notes next week if you want to see all of the bugs that were fixed. Future releases, modular parameters got moved out again, unfortunately, but we definitely just want to make sure that is perfect for all of you guys. So we're working on that. Also, type of is going to be released next month as well, which is something our engineer Johnny has been working on pretty hard on. So, yeah, 0.26 should have dynamic type updates, which Sydney will also present on in a little bit. All right, Marston, if you want to present.
Marston, you're muted if you're talking.
Oh, hello. Yeah, I just joined just in time.
Perfect.
That was my turn. It's perfect timing, I guess. Let me share my window here.
And Marston, while you're pulling that up, sorry to put you on the spot for this one, but can you detail a little bit more the JsonRPC command for Bicep, just kind of like what it's meant to do and help you do?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the JsonRPC command that we added basically allows you as a user to basically launch the Bicep CLI process and leave it around kind of like a mini server. And then you can just send commands to it to do compilation or decompilation without having to basically launch the CLI process. I'm loving the emojis, by the way. Credit for the features for the feature goes to, or at least the idea goes to Anthony. The reason we added it is to basically make our MS build package more efficient. Although we haven't made the MS build changes to use the JsonRPC command yet. But it'll basically allow us to like compile using MS build compile like a large numbers of files basically without taking on the hit of like the Bicep CLI startup, basically. And there was a hand up and a question, I think, in the chat somewhere. So I don't know if that was in the chat or.
The hand up may have been a clap unintentionally performed as a raised hand, but there is a question about could JsonRPC enable Pulumi style code that generates invokes IAC?
Good question. I think that is sort of independent. It's just JsonRPC is just a way to invoke the CLI. Like it can be invoked through code as well. So may not be understanding the question though about the Pulumi style code as I see, because I think you can do this already with Bicep if you just write some code to invoke our NuGet packages or script the Bicep CLI or just generate Bicep content and then compile it.
Cool. I think that was it.
Yeah. So let me jump into optional module names. So let me just share. Can everyone see my VS Code window? Because that should be the only thing I'm sharing right now. Can someone confirm? And I can't see the chat right now, by the way.
Yeah,
if
that's
someone's
fine.
saying. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so here I've got a VS Code window running basically a private build of Bicep, but it has the changes that we've already merged into the main branch that will be released with the next Bicep release. And basically the optional module name feature, like as you know today, when you use modules, so here, for example, I have a very basic module that just deploys a template spec. The fact that I'm using a template spec is not really interesting. It's just I just needed something that deploys quickly and doesn't take a lot of properties to configure. But I have a module that takes a template spec name as a parameter. And if I were to use that module, as all of you know, let's say if I just created a module that just a single module reference, used my module here and specified the required properties, I would have to specify any required parameter value, as well as a name for the module, which we will then compile into a nested deployment, and we will use the name as the expression they specify for the name property as the name of the nested deployment. Now, when you deploy this, like with complex module hierarchies, when one module references another and potentially pulling some from the registry, or it may itself be published to the registry and be referenced by other people, it's very hard to actually correctly set unique module names. Like if it's a small set, you can kind of it's doable and can be maintained if you maintain some sort of convention to ensure uniqueness. But let's say if you have other users with different conventions, you can end up with situations where like grandchild modules in a hierarchy just clash on a name, which will manifest itself as a basically deployment failure at runtime. And today, if you try not to include a module name, of course, the compiler will yell at you and tell you that it's required. However, we've added a new, right for now, experimental feature called optional module names. And if you enable that feature, which will be released in basically with the next Bicep release, module names are no longer required once that feature is enabled. And like right now, we're releasing this as an experimental feature to collect feedback and just find out if there's any problems with this approach. But if it's enabled, you don't have to specify the module name. It is still there if you want to override it or specify your own name. It's still possible to do, and it'll be accepted by the compiler, but it is not required. And if you want to do a module loop, it's the same kind of thing. Here, I'm just going to type that in. Just do a range function from 0 to 2, and just specify params. Let's say hello. I'm just going to not be very creative here. Just use the string interpolation to just number my template specs, like this. If you skip the module name, and here you can also override it. There's not really a difference there. If you don't specify a name and this feature is enabled, we actually will use this logic to generate the deployment, because we will still compile this to a nested deployment, but and the deployment engine will require us to give it a name or an expression for a name, and we will generate these for you basically as follows. So if it's a single module, basically as in a module that is not in a loop, The deployment name will have a suffix of basically a dash, and then a hash using the unique string function of basically the full symbolic name of the module. So in this case here, in the case of the single module, that will be this symbolic name here, the one that says single. And then the hash will also include the name of the current deployment. So that will be the deployment that is deploying the main.bicep file. And the prefix of that string will basically be as many characters as we of the symbolic name of the module, so the string single, that we can fit into the deployment name, because deployment names are basically 64 characters. So this value here takes about 13 characters. This dash here is just 1 character, and the remainder is basically going to be used up for whatever we can get out of the symbolic name. If you have a module loop, the logic is very similar, except we just jam the index using the copy index function in the middle. And then let's say if I compile this now, so I'll just build ARM template, it build succeeds. If we look at the main.json, you can see that the first deployment here basically is a format function call using single, because single fits inside. We didn't have to cut off the symbolic name. And then with a dash and then a placeholder for this call here to unique string that takes the whole symbolic name and the current deployment name. And we're hashing in the deployment name because we want this to chain. Like if someone in the child module also has the same symbolic name for another module or the same module, like these things will generate unique names and avoid a clash basically, because the hash will be basically different. They'll just chain off of each other. And if we scroll down to the second one here, the second nested deployment, this one is the one in the loop. So we've got loop dash index placeholder, which is just a call to the copy index, which ranges from basically 0 to 799, because that's the maximum number of iterations you can have in the loop. And then you have the second placeholder after a dash that is just the same kind of like unique string here. And if I were to deploy this, and in interest of time, I've actually done this, but let me switch to my browser here and start sharing again with a browser. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, there we go. All right, if you can see my browser now, and look at the deployments pane, main, the deployment called main here was the one I just deployed, which is basically deployed the main.bicep file. This is the deployment that deployed the single module. And then these are all the loop deployments ranging from 0 to 1 and then ending at 2. And then just to prove that I actually deploy these things, here's basically the set of template specs. That's the single one, and then we've got the 3 that were deployed in the loop. So basically, that's the optional module name feature. So we'd love to hear your thoughts, questions, comments. And I have not been paying attention to the chat, so I don't know if there's anything interesting happening there.
So
We do have a question. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
And I'm sorry, I'm calling in. I can't get this meeting open on Teams Mobile, so I apologize if I didn't raise my hand first. But will the deployment names that are generated be unique? Because I sometimes have to use something like the unique string function in order to get different module deployment names to differ from themselves, so they aren't colliding. If I am able to leave out the module name, will I still get that level of uniqueness?
Yes, you will. So basically we try to ensure what goes into the. I don't know if you actually could see my screen when I was sharing.
I cannot. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. So the formula that we use to calculate the name goes off of basically the symbolic name of the enclosing module. So like within the module that you're in, if you're actually, let me rephrase this. If you in a Bicep file, when you declare a module, you have to specify a symbolic name. So we use that as the first part of the string that we generate, and then we include a hash of the basically the full symbolic name, and then the deployment name of the current deployment. So that is the deployment that will actually, not the nested deployment, but the deployment that contains the nested deployment that the module compiled to. So we do take enough steps to ensure uniqueness.
Wonderful, thank you.
But you should still you should try it out and see if you find any bugs or issues, because that's why we made it an experimental feature, so we can still kind of make changes and make improvements based on feedback, and it's a lot easier to do it if it's an experimental feature.
Sure, appreciate it. Thanks.
We had another question asking, what triggered this development? Like, what problem did it solve? What came up?
The problem that we ran into, or our customers are actually reporting that they're running into through support, is that basically they have clashes in grandchild deployments. So let's say if you have a deployment that deploys modules that then internally also deploy modules and then internally deploy modules. The deeper you go into the hierarchy, the more likely you are, especially if you're pulling someone else's module to have clashes. Or sometimes it's just user error, where users will just not realize that there's something else deploying like a similar hierarchy or similarly named modules in different places, or similarly named deployment, causing basically similarly named nested deployments. And those clashes were causing us some support tickets, and the failures can be sometimes difficult to diagnose, because what ends up happening is you have a deployment that fails with an error that says that that we cannot deploy a nested deployment because it's already being updated. And that happens because one nested deployment wins because it's the first and gets started, and then the second one that attempts that has the clashing name will be rejected because it's a different nested deployment and we've already started one with the same name. So that is the problem that this is intending to do. Basically, we will generate unique names that don't have this problem if you just let us, like by not specifying, not hard coding the names yourselves. And you have this feature enabled.
I see it also as a good. Thanks, Stephanie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I also see that issue, like the failure, but also I think it's just a better, like an option for the community anyway, because I see a lot of customers that then get confused about why we've got two name parameters as well, right? One for the module name and one for the name of the resource in the module params block. So awesome work.
Yeah, thanks.
Someone's asking how we enable the feature again. Were you referring to? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let me just share the screen again with the VS Code extension. So just go back to VS Code. In Bicep config, you can there's this experimental features enabled section that's an object, and then if you go inside of it, and if you have either a private build from the main branch or the next release of Bicep when we release it, there's a set of experimental features that you can choose from, and this one is called if you bring up IntelliSense or completions, you can see the list, because we have a JSON schema for the config file. But this specific feature is called optional module names. And it should even come up if you just type like module. Yeah, if you type modules, it comes up as well. And initially we'll ship with it disabled. And if that goes through without causing too many issues, we'll eventually make it basically promote it to being just enabled always and remove it from the list of experimental features. But that'll probably be a few months down the line.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the explanation. Hopefully that answers your questions. Anything else on this topic? Otherwise, we can move on to our next topic. Okay, let me move on to the next topic. I'll reshare the PowerPoint. All right, Sydney?
Can you guys hear me?
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm working on the dynamic type syntax. So the goal of this project is to decouple the Bicep version and the Azure types version. So currently, when we ship a new Bicep version, it ships with all the packaged Azure types that are current to that release. But if new Azure types come out between a Bicep release and the next release, you won't be able to use them unless you download until the next release of Bicep. So what we want to do here is enable users to get these new types, because currently we're on the monthly Bicep release, but this may be spaced out in the future, and we want to ensure that these are decoupled. Another advantage of this will be that you can pin to an older version of Bicep and still pick up new types in the future. So here we're just looking for some feedback on a couple syntax ideas that we have. So this is the first iteration that we have. It's currently, I think, the syntax you can find on the experimental section of the documentation, but in a main.bicep file or any bicep file, you would use the provider keyword, and then you can import types from the registry. So as you can see, currently it's pulling from this bicep test df ACR registry, and it's pulling the AZ 0.111 types. And so let's say new types come out before the next release of Bicep and it's version 0.112, you would be able to just change that in the file and use the new types. So the advantages of doing it in each file, you have fine control over the API, the version available in each file, and it's easy to see this value in the files and change it to a different value if that's what you want. The cons of this is if you have multiple files, it may be difficult to maintain because you're having to change the version in each of them. And there's no central source of truth for a group of files. So that leads me to the second option that we have, and this would be in the Bicep config. So this syntax is not finalized in any way. This is just a mock-up of what it may look like. So we would add an extra section to the Bicep config file. And so here you can see the providers, the AZ provider. You can see the same registry. You can see a registry link and then the version that it would be using. So same thing. If new types are published, we would publish a new version of the AZ types, and you would be able to update it here instead of waiting for a Bicep release. So the pros of this is that you could set the version once for a set of files. And so if you have to update, if you want to update to a new type version, you can just change it in this one place. The cons of this is that it may be difficult to determine what files the Bicep config maps to. So does anybody have any feedback? You can put it in the chat. Any preferences on whether you would like this to be in each file or in one file? I can also paste a link to a GitHub issue, which has it in the registry if you want to put comments there. Kevin, do you have a question?
I do, yes, if you can hear me fine.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Out of curiosity, do you look at doing like a something like a global, like with the user-defined types, like having just a global file we could import from that way, like a global usings in C# or something like that? Instead of having to have it in each Bicep file, but having it in one that we could import from, or just import that for each of the Bicep files.
So yeah, somebody suggested a config file. Would it be similar to that?
Yeah, I mean, the Bicep config file I think is nice. Having it all in one location is good. Whether it was like a types file to keep it in a Bicep file might be easier, or I don't know. Just wondering if that was something that had been looked at.
Yeah, we have considered, there's a few alternatives. One of them was like a lock file. So yeah, please leave your feedback in the chat or in that GitHub issue, and we are still debating what the best way to do this is.
Sounds good. We'll provide feedback. This is
Thank
good.
you. Christian, I see your hands up.
Yeah, maybe I'm the only one, but right now when you publish a new Bicep build that includes all the API definitions, I'm quite happy with that. Meaning I don't care where they come from as long as they're recent. So from a user complexity management point of view, I would like to see a simple option go like, always use the latest published official thing. I don't want to kind of go and monkey around with per file or anything config. I just want to go, give me whatever you have right now.
Yeah, we're not going to change the standard the default behavior. So if you don't feel the need to be on these latest types and constantly
No,
update,
I want to be on the latest. Sorry, I want to be on the latest
okay.
types. I want to have an option go like download the latest thing, whatever there is.
I see. So to have Bicep automatically detect these updates.
Yeah, because
okay.
the proposals that I see now just increase the complexity of the system that for me are unnecessary. I grant you that there might be people that want that they want to control that. I don't. At least not yet. I don't see a point.
Okay. There will always be the latest types will always be bundled with the latest version of Bicep, just as it is now. So that's not going to change.
Yeah, but yeah, I would like to have then the option go like, well, download whatever even newer there is without having to upgrade Bicep maybe.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think Sydney, this is related to the discussion we were having around like by default or having some way to just always get the latest without having to put it in a config file or the module file.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying, Christian?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. I think the downside or the potential downside is we would be no longer guaranteeing that the build is reproducible, because without you opting into something, you would be changing how the types are imported and which types are imported. So that's the thing that we're trying to be very cautious about, basically.
Yeah, but you then still specify the API versions on the specific resources, don't you? So I mean, unless existing APIs change, which they shouldn't.
They
probably
shouldn't.
Acceptable. I don't know.
Yeah, we agree that they shouldn't, but from what we've seen, they may have some changes, which yeah, is not ideal, but we have to account for that in this reproducibility. Bernie, I see your hand still up.
Bernie, you're unmuted on Teams, but you might be hardware muted. We can't hear you.
Okay, yeah. Yep, Teams is, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, I was just wondering if you could go through what the like developer workflow would be in terms of updating like the version. Obviously, like we can obviously just manually bump the version, of course, but more like specifically if the version's not going to necessarily align with what's available in Bicep, maybe it's like actually 0.3.100, right? And we won't necessarily know that. So like I guess in terms of like a Bicep upgrade type thing where it would just then pin to the latest version or update the pinning. That was, I guess, what I'm sort of thinking.
Yeah, we're still looking at options for gestures, like a Bicep upgrade, and I agree that at some point that we will need some gesture to do that. We're not set on like the 0.111 is not anything finalized. We will have a way to view the latest types, or to view the latest versions of the AZ type provider. And that'll be, we'll have a new cadence for when types are published, and it'll be more frequent than the current Bicep upgrades, or yeah, Bicep versioning. And so that is how you will get the new types.
Cool. Makes sense. So I guess probably what I would sort of see like in a large repo is I definitely would have a lot of customers that would complain if then they have 100 files that they've got to update the provider for. But yeah, like I guess in terms of just knowing that you need to move to the next version, I definitely see that as something that we need to work through. Thanks. But great work.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm really glad that you called out that you have customers that have hundreds of files, because, you know, that really shows to us that, you know, maybe having it in every file and having to change it is not the most efficient way. But we'll definitely look into, again, the syntax for this as well as the gesture to upgrade. I can answer questions in the chat. Otherwise, we can move on to other topics.
Sure. Thanks, Sydney.
There is just one question that was asked that I did want to cover, which Austin asked, like, why now? Why are we doing this feature right now? Which is a good question. I think one of the things that we said to ourselves that we wanted to do for V 1.0, like the official 1.0, even though Bicep is obviously totally production ready and supported, is to be able to provide this functionality where if you want to be a very risk-averse organization, you can pin your Bicep version to a major version and still get all the type updates, and we just haven't been able to say that up to this point. So we've wanted to do this for a long time. It's just we haven't been able to for resourcing reasons up to this point. So it's always been on our list, and we finally were able to spend some time on it. As was optional names for modules. I think that was originally on our Bicep v0.2 list, not 22, just 2. And we finally got to it, so better late than never.
Okay, cool. If there aren't any other questions, we can move on to requested updates because there are a good amount here. Alex?
Yeah. So for the first one, the status of third-party extensibility, I think this was asked in the context of the Radius project, which was recently released, which has one, they have a Radius provider, but they also have an AWS provider. If you want to use Radius on AWS, that AWS provider is not available in quote unquote upstream Bicep or the service side version of the ARM template deployment service. But it is technically possible to light that up in the future. We've always been and frankly still are kind of hesitant of jumping into the world of third-party providers, similar to what Terraform does or Pulumi does or Crossplane does. It's just a big project to support an ecosystem like that. I think we are getting more open to it as time goes on and seeing things light up like the AWS provider, and there are a handful of data plane providers in Azure that would be really nice to have providers for Bicep. And so we need to spend some more time thinking about what the ecosystem would look like. But we are thinking about it certainly more than we were 6 months ago. So as there are meaningful updates to share here, we will discuss those. Number 2 is the status of the Carmel to AVM transition. So Carmel was the field project that's been out for a handful of years now. It actually started as an ARM template project and then became a Bicep project of resource modules. Now they've started a new effort, which is a spiritual successor called Azure Verified Modules, which is designed to have coverage across both Bicep and Terraform and be reasonably consistent where it makes sense. So that's a really exciting effort, and they're kind of underway. So if you've been looking at the Bicep public registry, you'll see more and more AVM modules lighting up there. And we're continuing to make progress, or they are continuing to make progress on it, I should say. So Alex is here in the chat and sharing more accurate and more detailed updates, but they're making really good progress on this. Number 3, there was an issue related to using the Azure account extension for pushing modules. I updated and Shenglong updated this issue this morning. There's a known issue with the Azure account extension for authentication. This one's a little bit out of our hands, but we linked to the most up-to-date version of the issue for the Azure account extension in that Bicep issue. So if you have questions about number 3, you can go and look at the GitHub issue for the latest. Number 4, user-defined types, inconsistent visualization of tooltips. So this is a bug in how we're rendering Markdown, or I guess depending on how you interpret it, it's a bug or just a design decision on how this was implemented. We would like to fix this. I don't know how quickly we will get to it. There's no ETA for when we will fix number 4. I don't know the extent to which it's a good community contribution. If anyone wants to take a run at that one, it might be worth taking a look at that. I don't suspect we're getting to it anytime soon. Number 5, allow usage of Bicep code in decorators. So the use case was to have like a description, but have a reference to a Bicep variable or something of that sort in the description and have that be properly evaluated, which is a cool idea. We just don't support it yet. If you are interested in number 5, please go ahead and upvote that. So that's another one that we need help with on reprioritizing it if it's more important than we think it is. Number 6, user-defined types, IntelliSense to display description before type. So this one, number 6, is basically if you have a really complex user-defined type, we display all the details of the structure or the structural type, which if it's a complicated type is a lot of information, and the description that you want is actually below that. It's probably not even correct that we're displaying the structure of the type in that context because it's so overwhelming. So there's an issue there that talks about rendering the type details in another place besides on the hover. So if you have any interest in that one, please do upvote that one as well. So there's some improvements there that could be done, but are currently not scheduled. Number 7, I wanted to spend a little bit more time on. So the request is to allow the creation of the parameters file or Bicep params without using. So the using keyword, which says this Bicep param file is tied to this Bicep file. And the reason that, the benefit of tying those two things together is we can give you good type safety and good completions and good validation of which parameters are missing, what the default values are, descriptions, so on and so forth. But really, right after we released it in the earliest phases, a lot of people asked us to relax the constraint and not make using required. We were having a conversation about this today, actually, and we wanted to get a better sense of which scenarios are critical for this ask, because the issue itself didn't have a ton of discussion on it. As we understand it, there are two scenarios here that need to be covered with this feature or could be covered with this feature. Scenario one is if you want to provide parameters that aren't in the Bicep param file, you want to pass those in the CLI. So you might have a secret that you don't want to put in the Bicep param file or something of that sort, or something that your own information you'll only get at deploy time. So you don't want it to have a default value in the Bicep file. You don't know it or don't want to put it in the Bicep param file, but you do need to provide it. It's not an optional parameter, in which case you want to do that on the CLI. If using is required, then you'll get an error in your Bicep param file saying you're missing a parameter. So by relaxing the using constraint, it enables scenario number one. And then scenario number two is to reuse the same Bicep param file for different Bicep files. So you might have a static Bicep param file, and you might have prod.bicep and dev.bicep or something of that sort, and you want to use the Bicep param for the same Bicep param for both files. So that's scenario number two, and that also would be enabled by relaxing the using constraint. There are other design options to deliver on both scenario one and number two, but it does enable both of those. The question for you all in the community is to get a sense of, if number 7 is a scenario that you care about, which of the two is kind of the more critical scenario. So what I'll do is I'll put in the chat scenario 1 and scenario 2. And if you could just put a thumbs up on those two options, that would be helpful to us, just to get an initial sense. Or if we're missing scenarios. So if you want to relax using for some other reason and we don't understand what that is, please let us know here, either in the call or on the chat, or feel free to add to this issue in GitHub. Any questions that I can answer about that one? Okay. So I put the two options. Oh, go ahead.
So again, sorry, I don't have access to the chat, but I actually like the Bicep param file the way it is with the using. Bicep param files, the way I use them, will necessarily be different environment to environment. So I don't really see a lot of need for any kind of overlapping. And if I've got something I don't want in it, I'm just probably going to pull it from a key vault anyway, because if I don't want to hard code it or I don't want it in a text file, I most certainly want it in a key vault.
Yeah, that perspective totally makes sense. And to be honest with you, it aligns closer to our interpretation for how this would be used. But there's definitely some energy out there to relax the constraint. So just to be clear, we wouldn't be, you would still be able to use the using keyword. We wouldn't be getting rid of it. But yeah, your feedback definitely makes sense there.
I understand. I'm just not a terribly relaxed person.
Got it. Understood. Okay. I think this covered everything I wanted to cover on requested updates. Were there any questions in the chat about any of the updates that I missed? Okay. I think that's all from me, Stephanie.
Oh, there was one. I see Whit has his hand up.
Yes, I guess could I request 2 other updates that I missed the email to request these?
Sure.
Yeah, of course.
Interpolation in multi-line strings. Any thoughts?
We haven't talked about it in a long time. I know that there's a good amount of upvotes on that particular issue, but there are I mean, literally no updates, but if others want us to take another look at that and see if we can do anything on priority, that would be good to know.
Great. And then I guess the second one, I just linked the other issue for it, was one that I filed 2 weeks ago of using, I guess, coming up with a better syntax for using module outputs and loops. So I saw you recently just got assigned to this, but I guess I found that, you know, while trying to loop through a module output, you know, Bicep doesn't allow that because the module hasn't actually deployed yet, and so it wants constants. So it doesn't know how many iterations it's going to need and all that. But if you shift it all into a module, and then you essentially put the loop inside that module, it works fine. I guess, is there any opportunity for Bicep to essentially create these intermediary modules for you so that you can, you know, just need that you don't need to change anything about the syntax. It's just, you know, when the file itself is, you know, when Bicep creates the ARM template, it just does this module for it.
Yeah, I owe you, like you said, a response on that one. I'd like to better understand why we can't just evaluate reference in that context. So the issue is that there is a reference statement in your expression. But I need to do a little more due diligence on that. So you'll get an update on that issue.
Right. Thank you.
Yep.
There was one, Alex, earlier on the call. Earlier on in the call, I think you wanted to discuss the add support for load file with variable parameter replacement. Was this covered? I wasn't sure.
No, I didn't cover it. Thank you for the reminder on that. So this one, there's no update on it, but I really need to just rename this issue. But doing it for variables is considerably easier than doing it for parameters. I don't know if it'll ever be possible to do it with parameters, although maybe with Bicep params it's an option. My question for load text content, is it good enough to support just variables in this context, or do we specifically need to support parameters? And I think at least John Paul Smith, if you could respond, that would be awesome. Yeah, I think maybe I can bring this discussion to the issue itself. Because if you can get it done with a variable, it may be practical to do this. But with parameters, we don't know what the value of the parameter is going to be, and it is dynamic. So we can't load files for parameters that we don't know the value of. We can only do that with a variable. But I'll post an update onto the issue, and we can start the conversation there. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. We have another hand up. Garo?
Yeah, I was going to put in the chat the OCI compliant registries. Any update on those?
So
alternative to using Azure.
Yeah, actually, Sydney and I were just talking about that this morning as well. So there is technically a ORAS SDK, which is the SDK we need to support non-ACR registries. We need to do a little bit due diligence on who is building that and what the long-term plans of that are, because if we can figure out some long-term maintenance of that and make sure we know that that's properly supported, we should be able to light that up. But this is one I hope we can make some progress on, because the current state of only supporting ACR is not a great one, and we don't really have any good story or workarounds or anything for other ACR or other non-ACR registries. Or you can take Ryan Nowak's advice and use the ORAS CLI itself. But I don't know Are you saying, Ryan, if we wanted to implement it, we could use the Aura as CLI? Not that a user could.
You could do that, but then you'd have to get the Aura CLI on the user's computer, right? So because we solve this inside of Radius. So we have a Bicep publish command that does non-OCR, but that's because we're written in Go. So we can use the Go Aura SDK, which is way more complete. But you can use the Aura CLI directly for this if you want to.
Yeah. Makes sense. I think
that's not as good as a supported solution, but if anybody's really blocked, you can do this with the Aura CLI today.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so we definitely want to make some progress on this one. It's probably been a little too long, the current state of only supporting ACR. And now we have Radius showing off all these new fancy capabilities that we need to get into upstream Bicep.
Cool. Are there any other questions?
I've got actually two, and they're mostly quality of life issues, as in I can work around them, but there are ways that they could be made easier. First of all, a regex replace function for strings would just make storage account naming so much easier. And secondly, the ability to scope a resource to a resource group rather than having to write a module for it would cut down on the amount of modules that I have to write solely so that I can scope a particular piece of functionality to a different resource group than the calling module has.
Yeah, those are both good ones. The second one I know we have an issue for, and aspirationally we would like to do it. It would require some significant changes to the runtime if we didn't want to like hack around it and kind of generate the nested deployment on your behalf, though that is technically an option. The first one, I don't know if we have a regex replacement issue tracking it. I don't know if any of the Bicep team happens to remember if there is one. So maybe
didn't we have a similar ask a while ago for that on just something that could just auto name some of these things? You know, like storage accounts that's just mostly random strings.
I don't remember. Yeah, I just don't remember if there is an issue out there. I don't know who's on the call because I just see the phone number, but do you want to create an issue for that regex feature request?
I can certainly do that. This was just like a thing that occurred to me about 2 days ago. So I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But with the naming schemes that we use, I like to use parameters to define the different bits that go into a naming scheme. And I always have to go through and create a different way of generating that for storage accounts. Like I said, it's quality of life thing. I can work around it. It would be, in my way of seeing things, much cleaner if I could just regex replace everything but lowercase letters and numbers.
Yeah, makes sense. And then it looks like Satish, there's a hand up.
Yeah, hi all. Actually, I have one query. Hello?
Sure. Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, actually, recently I have deployed the VMs in Norway West using the Azure Bicep. But I have used the Bicep modules, but I want to run a particular module in Azure Bicep. It is suited to run the module in Bicep anyway in separate module using the YAML pipelines. Sorry.
Sorry, Satish, I didn't quite understand what the question was. It can you execute Bicep
Actually,
in a
yeah. Actually, I have deployed the servers in Norway East location using the Azure Bicep. Okay, I want to run only separate module in Azure Bicep. Any option is there to run the separate module?
Oh, so you
Azure
have
Bicep?
you have a Bicep file that's deploying 3 modules, let's say, but you only want to deploy one of the 3 modules in the file?
Yeah, only single module I have to run in main file. There are so many modules are there, but I want to run the a specific module in your main.bicep.
The only option you would have for modules in the Bicep file is to use conditional deployments. So you can put a condition on the module itself, and based on some input parameter, you can decide to execute the module or not. Are you familiar with conditional deployments, Satish?
Yeah, how conditional deployment is there.
So that's the only option that comes to mind. Otherwise, what you could do is break up the Bicep files themselves. So instead of having a main.bicep call a bunch of other modules, you could call the modules themselves individually in the pipeline. And in your pipeline YAML, you could have some condition for execution there as well, which I think YAML pipelines support in some capacity.
Thank you. And one more question. Actually,
Sure.
I have there are 2 files are there. Actually, we have earlier I have worked with the ARM templates. Currently, we have looking forward to move to Bicep. Actually, there is a in Norway location we have some VMs. There is a in like they have to set up the disaster recovery from Norway to Northwest. Actually, we have already deployed the recovery service vault in Norway West using the ARM template. But I want to integrate from Azure Bicep to ARM template. But normally earlier we have used the both are in ARM template only. That way we have used the customized ARM split ARM template. And that time we have deployed we have mentioned the under VMs we have mentioned the disaster recovery module. But any options are there to attach the existing disaster parameters to Azure Bicep and file?
Yeah, so you can call an ARM template from a Bicep file as a module. So you can do module, whatever, my ARM templates.
Okay, but actually I have referred the MS document to check to enable the VM replication in disaster recovery. They have different options are there. There is a protected containers and protected items will be there. Same way I have to create the module.
I don't know if I'm totally following Satish. I think what might be the most productive is do you want to send me an email with the details about the scenario you're looking to accomplish, and then we can kind of sort it out from there?
Yeah, sure. I will share the mail once this community call is completed, so that I will share the details to you.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're just about at time. Is there any last minute questions that anyone has? Great. Thanks everyone for another great year. And we'll all see you next year. Thanks everyone.
Thanks all. Have a great holiday, great New Year's, all the things. And thank you for continuing to show up to these community calls and making it interesting.